Today's webinar is entitled COVID-19 and International Students, Challenges for Schools and Employers, and is brought to you by the European American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Cincinnati and our French American Business Alliance Committee. The EACC is where Europeans and Americans connect to do business. I'm Todd Schwartz, Executive Director of the Cincinnati Chapter of the European American Chamber of Commerce, and I will be your host today. I'm proud to say that we've been able to partner with the French American Chamber of Commerce in Michigan and in Ohio, as well as the French honorary consuls for Central, Southern, and Northern Ohio, as well as our EACC chapters in Paris, Lyon, and Toulouse in organizing this event today. And I'm very grateful for all of the support. And we have about 50 folks registered for today's event, so I'm sure that we're going to have a very vibrant and transatlantic and international discussion. One quick disclaimer, please note that all comments and opinions presented by our speakers today are their own. They do not necessarily represent the views of the European American Chamber of Commerce or its members. Now, this is a fast-moving topic, and we have a good variety of voices. So our discussion today will be a little more loosely structured than some of the other webinars you may have attended. And we also want to make sure our audience has an opportunity to join the conversation. I mentioned that Q&A button. Again, I would encourage you to use that at any time to offer your comments and questions. And if you think it's something particularly relevant, if you'd like to be considered to offer your remarks verbally, please be sure to add your name, title, and organization to any comments or questions you submit, and we may be able to bring you verbally into the discussion. We do have a very distinguished panel of experts today, and we will send around their bios. You should have received their bios just before this event. We'll be sending them around again afterwards, but let me just quickly introduce our speakers. Cedric Ballerin is president of the Michigan chapter of the French American Chamber of Commerce. Isabelle Bibec-Cagnac is the honorary consul of France for Northern Ohio and an attorney with the firm McDonald Hopkins. Karine Chaud is dean at the French American Business School CFAM in Lyon, France. Philippe Garnier is the CEO and general manager at Safran Landing Systems in Walton, Kentucky. Laurent Servant is the Director for International Programs and Partnerships at the University of Bordeaux. Jenny Suttmuller is the Director of International Strategic Partnerships at the University of Cincinnati. And Professor Fernando Unzueta is the Associate Vice Provost for Global Strategies and International Affairs at The Ohio State University. Now I'd like to introduce Nellie Bagnol. Nellie is the Honorary Consul of France for Southern Ohio and Kentucky. She is also Vice President of Provider Operations with Essilor-Luxottica iMed Vision Care. And most importantly to me, she's the chair of the French American Business Alliance, which is one of the committees of the EACC here in Cincinnati. Nellie, would you like to offer a few words of welcome?
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for your introduction. Yes, indeed, the FABA group is a French component or committee, if you will, of the European American Chamber of Commerce. So what we do is, with the help and collaboration of the EACC, the FABA group, French American Business Alliance, as its historic name, is dedicated to propose meaningful projects, events, opportunities that connects America and France on business matters. So last week, as news were breaking out on recent decision from the US immigrations directions, we felt we needed to create an opportunity of dialogue and exchange on how this impacts our schools and our companies. I reached out to some of our guest speakers, Todd reached out to some of them as well. And I'm actually extremely excited to see we were able to put together such an amazing panel of guest speakers in such a short time. To all of you, huge thank you for your reactivity, for your time today to create a meaningful exchange for all of us. I am eager to listen and to better understand the situation of our international students from France and from the US, but also from all over the world.
Okay, now to set the stage, we developed the idea for this event when it was announced that international students whose institutions were offering only online instruction would not be permitted to stay in the United States. Now that rule was rescinded after a court challenge. But there is no denying that foreign students are finding it more difficult to enter the United States. American consulates are only now beginning to restart visa operations. Travel to the United States remained banned from the Schengen countries and elsewhere in the world, and a broader perception of anti-immigrant feelings are dampening enthusiasm of international students to come and visit the United States. Educational exports from the United States, of which international students are the major part, were valued at over $45 billion over the 2017-2018 academic year and supported well over 450,000 jobs in the United States, according to the US Department of Commerce. So this is big business in its own right. But beyond these numbers, there are important intangible factors, like having students take back American ideas and standards and technology to their home countries. And for the purposes of our discussion today, we also know that companies around the world, including Europe, look to American colleges and universities as pipelines of talent, providing the engineers and accountants and managers and future executives needed to run those companies, or they will graduate to build their own companies and drive our economies forward. So today we're going to look at really three aspects of this issue. First, let's understand the current legal and regulatory obstacles that students and faculty members may be facing, and what challenges may lie on the horizon. Then we'll hear from the schools themselves how these issues are impacting their operations and their ability to meet the demands of employers. And then finally, we'll hear from some companies. We'll talk about how they have worked with universities in the past and how what their primary concerns are today. And finally, if current trends continue, we will look at what alternatives companies may be considering to ensure they have the talent they need in the future. Now, since we only have 1 hour for this topic, we'll only be able to scratch the surface on many of these issues, but we hope this leads to a broader discussion of how immigration, education, and business are interconnected. And since our time is limited, I will of course ask everyone to keep your remarks brief and short. But let's start with Isabel Vivit-Kalniak from McDonald Hopkins. Isabel, can you take just a couple minutes to describe the challenges that a foreign student faces trying to enter the United States in general, and then how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted those challenges?
Of course, thank you, Todd. So students have, in order to come to study in the US, have to get one of three types of visas. It's F1, M1, and J1 visas. These visas are administered by different agencies, and I think that's the first hurdle. This is a very, very complicated system. And we have a summary slide about this that shows all the different federal agencies that have jurisdiction over immigration overall. When you're talking about M1, F1, or J1 student visas, you're already dealing with totally different departments. You're dealing with the Department of Homeland Security for the M and the F visas, and then you're dealing with also the Department of State for the J1 visas. Thank you for sharing, Todd. So we're talking about the left quadrant there and then the center quadrant. So students are administered by the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, or the CFAM, depending on how you want to call it. And the CFAM manages schools, non-immigrant visas in the F and M visa classifications, as well as their dependents. So you have the student, but the student can also come with a spouse and potential children as well. The Department of State handles the J1 program, and there's less talks about that nowadays, but they are also affected. So on June 22nd, suddenly, we're talking about 1.5 million of students who come to study in the US, plus their dependents. The proclamation from President Trump suspended entry of aliens who present a risk to the US labor market following the coronavirus outbreak. So we're talking about students. A lot of people scratch their head. What do students have to do with the labor job market? So what happens is once the student is here and we're the vast majority of students come actually from Asia. Number one is China, closely followed by India. And these are the numbers for 2018 from the government. We do not have the 2019 data at this stage. When students come here, they also get the right to complete some internships while they're studying, and these are paid usually. And they also get the right to study once they complete their degree. And we're talking about the F1 category. So students get the right to work for 1 year. And in the case of STEM occupations, we're talking about sciences, research, students are allowed up to 3 years in the US. So this is why students are included in the proclamation suspending entry of aliens presenting a risk to the US labor market. As the employment rate between February and May reached the double digits, and in May reached 13.3% in the US, the president felt that it was important to not just suspend the H-1Bs, the L-1 visas, which are for non-immigrants in specialty occupations or transferees from companies, but also to extend this to students. So the students that are here are not affected. Schools can still issue what we call the forms of DS-20s to these students, but students that are today outside of the United States are stuck. They're in limbos, they've been accepted, they've filled all the criteria, but because of a proclamation which is set to expire as of today in December 31st, 2020, these students are stuck. And the reason is all the US embassies and all the consulates overseas for the US are not issuing the visas. So we're talking about the visa stamp that the students get in their passports. The embassies are not allowed to schedule the interviews and issue these visas. The students can go online and fill out the applications, but they can, however, not get an interview at these consulates. The good news about this is that we are seeing the consulates and the embassies slowly return to normal. And we've summarized at least the situation at the embassy in Paris. And currently, of course, the services for US nationals are continuing, but for the non-immigrant visa appointments that have been canceled, the student visas are supposed to restart shortly. We're seeing the business visitors, the B1, B2 are restarting in September. The E2 category for investors is also restarting. So there's progress. If you have an application in the progress, you also have some email information there that you can use to get more information from the Paris agency. For information about our consulates, please feel free to contact us offline and we'll gladly fill you in. So there's no other system unless these students are involved, for example, in research with COVID-19, either in treatment or providing care. So for example, if the students are actually medical students, for now, everybody's stuck outside of the States and waiting for entry. What complicates matters is that, of course, the consular agencies fall under a different department. They are also under the Department of State. And so you have a lot of coordination to do. So when the White House puts a stop on everything, it's very difficult to restart the machine because people, you just can't turn the switch overnight. So although we don't expect that this will not restart at this stage, what we know is that we at least have to wait until probably the fall.
Thank you so much, Isabel. It's absolutely fascinating. And just to point out, we will send around the slides to everybody after the event as well as with the recording. Isabel, very quickly, all this so far has largely been done by presidential proclamation. Do you know if there are any legislative steps under consideration in the Congress that may help the situation or may make this situation any more problematic, or is Congress really just sitting this one out?
So Todd, that's a trick question because there are actually always immigration proposals in Congress. And this is not due just to the Trump administration. This has always been the case. Our immigration regulations are dated back in the 1980s when the world looked very different. So there are constantly some proposals, mainly from the Democrat side, and going back to the DACA, as you know, the people that were also brought here by parents and are children of illegal immigrants and are also therefore illegal here. But what we know is that every time there is a proposal from one side or the other, we cannot find the bipartisanship to get this through and move forward. And also the second constant there is that every time there is either a proposal or we move forward or the president issues some executive orders, they often can get stopped, at least temporarily, through the filing of lawsuits. So this is the case currently with the lawsuits that was filed by the National Association of Manufacturers and various other bodies. So it seems that we're stuck in this mode for now. And unfortunately, students and American businesses just have to wait out. So
I think in some ways, maybe the most important piece of information you gave there is that Paris is starting to reschedule visas, and I presume many of the European and other consulates one of the American consulates in Europe are starting to do those as well. At some point, maybe we can also come back to the question of reciprocity, which also enters into it, but I want to make sure we move on. We've got a lot of other speakers to go to. Thanks again for that input. Let's move on to the universities, and let's talk about the impact there. Now, Jenny Suttmuller is from the University of Cincinnati, Laurent Servant at the University of Bordeaux. Now, your two schools have this absolutely remarkable and what I believe is a very unique partnership in a range of fields, particularly in aerospace and engineering. Jenny, let's start with you. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about that partnership that you have, and then how the COVID-19 crisis is impacting that relationship and maybe other strategic partnerships that you see as formed.
Sure. So the University of Cincinnati and the University of Bordeaux, we have been longstanding strategic partners, which for us means that we have sustained collaborations both with student mobility, faculty mobility, joint research, dual degree programs, and not just in one field, but across the university in a number of different disciplines. So there's a lot going on between our universities in this strategic partnership, as well as we have a number of strategic partnerships around the world as well. As you mentioned, our strategic partnerships absolutely have been affected by COVID-19. Of course, I think the biggest impact has been the restriction on travel, of course. Not only are our students not able to study abroad in either direction, but faculty visits, research visits, and things like that have had to be postponed or canceled, of course. But knowing that the first month, 4 to 6 weeks, was really about putting out fires, crisis management, from the study abroad side, bringing students home safely, dealing with financial implications and curricular implications. From the international student side, it was helping them move out of their dorms when the residence halls closed, and helping advise students on the constantly changing environment and how it was affecting their immigration and visa status. So, that once that kind of slowed down to more of a hum, we were able to, put more effort and more time and resources into thinking about how the pandemic is really going to affect our partnerships in the long term and what we can do to adapt and make sure that our international activities with our partners don't just sit on hold for a year or 2 years or however long this may take, but to really be creative and think together on how we can adapt our partnership into a virtual format. So a couple examples that we've started to implement and we're in the development stages of, and we hope to launch this fall. One, we have a virtual global student lounge to continue to engage students so they can, from all of our partner institutions, our strategic partners, have a place to form community, continue to exchange perspectives, global perspectives, and explore relevant topics. So whether that's, public health or poverty, equality, whatever these, issues are that affect every institution, every student, to share that across university and country lines. And we're also working on hosting a series of mini conferences for our faculty to continue to engage with other faculty from institutions across the globe, so they can share their work, have an international audience, and we hope that that will eventually lead to new connections, potential research connections and collaborations in the future. In addition, we are also working with our strategic partners on some micro-credential courses, so retraining and upskilling for those who maybe have been displaced in their industry. So we're starting with a pilot program this fall, and we are working with our faculty from UC as well as our partners, including the University of Bordeaux, to teach some of these, jointly teach some of these credentials, micro-credentials, which will be offered virtually and to students around the world.
Jenny, you mentioned the upskilling piece, and again, we want to make sure we're our focus really here is like how this interconnection works between the universities and companies and so forth, and leads me to turn to Laurent and ask you. I mean, you've talked already a little bit about the difficulty and the partnerships. Laurent, I mean, you're there in Bordeaux, the center of the aerospace industry in France, very important to our region, CFM, Safran, etc. Thales, you name it, they're there. Can you talk a little bit maybe just about what that interaction between the university and the companies look like? I mean, the companies that you're working with, the mix between research, talent development, employees, so forth. And again, I mean, a little bit about how you see this ongoing crisis, if you will, with students potentially impacting some of that.
So yes, Jenny perfectly described what happens to all the universities in the world. One morning after political decision, all the universities in the world had to find where their students were and what they were doing, if they were abroad, if they were very far. And in fact, it was quite a complex situation that each university had to face in accordance to its own regulation. So in fact, I think when we look at this crisis is that we have to try to find the positive aspect to this crisis, if any. But there is one aspect that we have to redesign, to reinvent, in fact, teaching and training for students, and maybe to do research at the international level. And this has been an opportunity to think about how to teach students, for example. It's sure that now having students in a room and the professor writing on the blackboard, it's no more possible. It will be much more complex. So we have to reinvent, to redesign. It forces our administration, our professor to think about how being efficient, how to be able to teach and to share knowledge with students who are remote. And in fact, this can be very interesting for companies and industry because it's connected to the long life training problems and issues. And so in fact, we had to redesign all our teaching system. So we are still doing it because as long as we do not have any vaccine, we don't know how all that will go. And for example, in our partnership with the University of Cincinnati, it has been for a long time. And what is interesting with international relations is that we can experience a very new type of teaching. And for example, we had, I think it is in chemistry, we had a kind of project where students start a project in their own university for months. So they meet through video and they exchange through emails and even through postal mail for some of the devices. And during all the year, they are by little groups in order to make a project happen and to make a project precise, and they have support and advice from professors in UC and in UB. And what was done previously, that at the end of the year, all the students meet, for example, in Bordeaux, and make presentation about their work. And it was a very big event because people could meet physically for the first time. But anyway, they had learned to work together, far from each other. And this type of teaching is now developing more and more. And I think it's something very interesting because, again, when you consider companies, the issue of long life training is very frequently asked at the university. And of course, at the university, it was not the priority, but maybe we are developing tools that can be used very efficiently within that context. And concerning our partnership with Cincinnati and aerospace, we had to postpone the traveling of the students coming to Bordeaux or coming to the UC. So I think it has been postponed for 1 year. And this training involved a lot of companies. And there was lectures which were given by people from companies, from Dassault, from Safran. And so even on that level, they have to reorganize their teaching and to think again, to think how they can make it more efficient and redesign. So in fact, I would say that this crisis make compulsory a new redesign of teaching, and I think it's ongoing, as Jenny said, and it can be very interesting to see how what will be the new results of this communication with students and with researchers.
That's absolutely fascinating. And again, I think every industry, every business, every aspect of our lives is going to be very, very different after this. And as you say, I think the current crisis really only accelerating some of those changes that we're starting to see. So that's very helpful, and including those relationships between businesses and universities. Now, while we're on that side of the Atlantic Ocean, Karine Cho, tell a lot of people may not be, or some people may not be familiar with CFAM. Can you tell us just very briefly a little bit about CFAM there in Lyon, and how, sort of how your programs were originally conceived, and then how are you having to alter the programs that you offer, both to meet the needs of your students and the companies that are hiring your students?
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Well, CFAM is a French and American business school based in Lyon. It was created in 1996, so almost 35 years ago now, a long time ago, and in partnership with different American business universities. So we work with 8 different partners in the US, which are all located on the east coast of the US, and they're all ACSB accredited, so good universities. So basically our students spend some time in France, in Lyon, geographically, but in the classes, they're already in the US. So the model of CFAM is based on the American model, the American education model. So CFAM can be seen as a stepping stone for the students to go to the US. They spend some time in France, and then they go to the US for the final year. So they get a dual degree, either BBA degree. They spend 4 years total, 3+1, 3 in Lyon and 1 in the US, or a 4+1, 4 years in France and 1 final year for the MBA in the US. So two degrees. So the students also have, of course, internships to do. So some of them want to do it in the US, but they can do it in every single country in the world. And usually they try to do it in other countries because they know they're going to go and study in the US. So that's the choices. And we recruit students from all over the world, as they're going to have the French experience as well as the American experience. So of course, as for Laurent and Jenny, I mean, we were truly affected by the crisis, and we had to manage this difficult situation as we had students in the US, and most of them were in the New York City area. So it was tough for them. So we had to deal also with the families, the parents calling, say, well, what can we do? Do they have to come back? Will they be able to come back, because of the visa issue at the time? So we had to deal with that. Then for our international students who were at CFAM, coming from India, China, same thing, we had to deal with them, and they had to go back to their home country. And at the same time, we had to keep teaching. And so the challenge, we have to move very quickly. And we usually say to our students to think outside the box, but we had no box at that time. It was a completely new situation for us. So okay, we're going to do it, and we're going to go online, and we're going to do everything online. But teaching for students who were then back to the US or back to China, but at the same time in France, was quite complicated. But we did manage. So we had to also reinvent the whole system. And I agree with Laurent. I mean, we need to reinvent the model. And well, the technology is more than welcome. Now it doesn't, I guess it doesn't replace the real experience, life experience, because when American students come to CFAM or other nationalities, they come for the experience. And there are some kind of thing you cannot learn, I guess, from behind from a computer. So that's a point. So our alumni live in 60 different countries. So some of them, 30% of them, make the choice to stay in the US after graduation. So again, well, the visa issue is important, H-1Bs for most of them, or PTs for, once they graduate. Otherwise, they live everywhere in the world. And in the US, they live, most of them, on the East Coast.
Thanks for that. That's very helpful and good to understand. And, again, everybody's trying to be flexible. I love the idea of, when we weren't trying to create a new, reinvent the box. I mean, we're working, there was no box. So how do we do this? It's a really good analogy. Let's step back just a little bit, maybe if we can. Fernando and Zoeda at the Ohio State University, was as one of the largest universities in the United States, you have industry partnerships in fields from polymer, and I looked on your website, polymer and composite engineering, applied plant sciences, that's like growing plants, not factories, automotive research, smart vehicles, et cetera. I'm sure a lot of that work, of course, revolves around international students, international researchers, and of course, international companies doing business, along the auto corridor that extends all the way down from Michigan through Ohio. Can you talk maybe just a little bit in broader terms about how these international students and these international relationships contribute to the life of a school like Ohio State, and how COVID is impacting some of those relationships?
Thanks, Todd and Nelly and your organizations for organizing this timely webinar. When we think about Ohio State, we talk about size and the numbers, and I'll mention a few both nationwide and OSU specific, but let me start by saying that the best universities need to recruit the best students and scholars. And to do so, you need to attract talent from around the world. I think that's true for universities, and it's also true for leading industries. So international students are an integral part of higher education in the US. Their numbers have increased steadily and more than doubled between 1997 and 2017 to reach over 1 million, or roughly 5.5% of the overall student population in this country. The number of new international students nationwide peaked in 2015 and 16 and has decreased since then. And as we know, things are very much in flow, and we don't know really what's going to happen in the future nowadays. Overall, international students gravitate towards research institutions. 70% of them are in such type of institutions like Ohio State and all other universities around the country, which are, our institution is heavily involved in international higher education and research. We want to make sure that not only our international students, but also our domestic students are prepared to compete in an internationally competitive world. So We're among the top 10 US universities sending students overseas on study abroad experiences, about 3,000 per year. And I should note that most of these education abroad experiences recently include medical rotations and internships in partnership with international businesses and institutions. We're also among the top producer of Fulbright Fellows, both for students and scholars, and Peace Corps volunteers around the world. So that's what we do. In terms of international students, we have about 7,000 of them. That puts us in the top 25% in the country. It's not as high as other peer institutions in the Big Ten. Out of those international students, 40% of them or so are graduate students. And as they do follow the pattern nationwide, most of them are in STEMs, in fields, science, technology, and engineering fields. They comprise about 10% of undergraduate population, but as about 25% of the graduate population. And that varies greatly by field, as I mentioned. So most Ohio State students will have international TAs or graduate research assistants, and that's to be expected in departments of engineering. Perhaps more surprisingly, the Department of Economics has 85% of their graduate students are international students, and a colleague from Penn State mentioned that at that institution, 90% or more are international students. So the future economists trained in this country are mostly international. We also host about 700 international researchers on J-1 visas that were mentioned before. And right now we have about 200 employees on H-1B visas. Again, those numbers are unfortunately going down for reasons Isabel explained. They tend to be mostly faculty members and in the medical field working in the hospitals. We all know that the economic impact of international students is very significant, around 1.3 billion and 15,000 jobs in Ohio to complement the figures Todd, you quoted nationally. So optional practical training is certainly one of the ways in which international students gain work skills and contribute to the economy. As of last month, we had 1,400 Ohio State students on OPT. I think that makes us, ranks us 15th in the nation. I saw the figure of 200,000 students nationwide on OPTs. The top private sector employers for Ohio State would include the university hospitals, Huntington National Bank, DHL Supply Chain, Abercrombie and Fitch, JP Morgan Chase. But we also have very strong partnerships with Battelle, one of the largest research companies in the country, and Honda, to mention just two of them. I would like to remind us something the US Chamber of Commerce stated on the importance of OPT. They said 22% of America's billion-dollar startups had at least one immigrant founder that came to the US as a student. So without OPT, I would add the US will erode its scientific and technological edge. From our office's perspectives, it would make our job of attracting new international students and scholars and faculty members much more difficult. I think international education is much more competitive worldwide now than it used to be for the US. And most immediately, of course, eliminating OPT would affect many companies and research labs. So in terms,
well,
I'm not sure how we.
Well, let me just, let me step in here, because again, I think you're hitting some really interesting stuff, and I think, not to, and of course you didn't mention Ohio State has a great marching band, but we're talking a little bit about the relationship with companies and so forth. And I think it's very interesting to hear it from the academic side, from, as we call it, the ivory tower. Let me turn now, if I might, not to cut you off, but I want to turn now to Philippe. Let's talk about the factory floor. Our friends over at Safran Landing Systems, Philippe Garnier, they make, they've got about 300 people making wheels and carbon brakes for a broad range of Boeing and Airbus aircraft. This is probably some of the most critical work in the world. If you've been on an airplane, thank Philippe that the thing stopped before you got to the end of the runway. And the way that they do that is, of course, they have remarkable engineers, remarkable material scientists, and others working at their team. Philippe, tell us a little bit about your partnership with University of Cincinnati and other schools, and about how you engage with those institutions, both for talent as well as for research.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Well, first, let me say that that COVID crisis also had a major impact on our operations, because every summer, we typically welcome 15 to 20 students, in addition to the 300 employees you mentioned. And for us, it's very important, because those students, they basically become the pipeline of our future hire. So it's really important for us to detect talent. Those students, typically, they come from the US, and you listed the UC. That's one of our, I would say, major partner in terms of internship, but not the only one. And we also have students that come from France, which is also something very interesting, because it's really creating a melting pot of different cultures, and the students kind of working together. It's really nice. So this year, unfortunately, we had to completely cancel our internship program, because most of our supporting staff was working from home. So that was very difficult to have it. And we took that difficult decision to basically completely cancel it. And that's really a pity, because this year we had again a very nice lineup with students coming from UC, University of Cincinnati, but also UK, University of Kentucky, University of Louisville, and NKU. And truly, that's for us the reservoir of the new hire for tomorrow. So in addition to that, we also had several students that were scheduled to come from France, and which could not get any visa because the consulate closed, and then it was too late. We even had one coming from the famous École Polytechnique, I would say the top engineering school in France. And that's really a pity for us that we could not do that. And with that cancellation, this year we won't be able to assess or gauge those students for potential new hire. But at the same time, those students, they won't have the exposure of our company. So they will not discover the company, they will not discover the group, and therefore it's going to reduce significantly the attraction. Regarding the French student, there is a second negative effect. Since we typically select our VIEs, which are coming here for a year or 18 months after an internship the previous summer. So this year we didn't get them, so it's gonna be difficult. As of this summer, we have 3 VIEs that are finishing their contract, and I won't be able to replace any of those, because there will be no J1 visa issued this year.
Yeah, it's clearly a very challenging situation for a lot of companies, and again, we're as we think about the future for a company like Safran and what you do down there, obviously it's a big obstacle.
So as far as the I would say that's how we integrate a little bit the COVID crisis. But actually this week we took the decision to start a fall program, knowing that, and it won't work for the international student, obviously, but for the US student, try to salvage a little bit, salvage it. A lot of the students won't have physical classes, and a lot of them will have online classes. And several of them already came to us and say, you know what, I have 2 or 3 and I will be around staying with my parents. Most of them are kind of local, living in the greater Cincinnati area. Is there still a way to have an internship in the summer, knowing that my classes anyway will be online? And this week we took the decision to start maybe on a reduced scale, but a full internship program with those students.
Yeah, I'm sure lots of companies are trying to find innovative ways to do everything they do, including continuing these kind of internships and training programs. Cedric, you've been very patient. I mean, you're with the French American Chamber of Commerce there in Michigan. And of course, in Michigan, many of your companies are very, very closely tied to the automotive industry, which, as we all know, is A, extremely international, B, relies very heavily on a steady flow of engineers from the best colleges and universities around the world. And C is perhaps now in one of the most important races they've been in to research and bring to market new products like zero emission vehicles. So how are your members being impacted by these disruptions, and how are they trying to deal with some of these challenges? Are they able to implement programs like Philippe is working with?
Absolutely. So first, Todd, Nelly, thank you very much for having me as part of this panel today. The FACC in Michigan represents approximately 70 companies, which are either French companies with a footprint here in Michigan, or American companies doing business with those French companies or having interest in the relationship with France. I would echo what has already been said by saying that these companies operate on a global scale. Our customers are global, the technologies we handle are global, the challenges we face are global, and as a result of it, the pool of talent we draw from is also global. If you look at the career history of all the industry leaders, for the large majority of them, if not all of them, they have experienced individually some form of international assignments, either as part of their education, as part of internship in organization, or as part of their career in those companies. So the international aspect of a career, the international aspect of a training is extremely important to our members. These companies, for the most part, have entered into partnerships with colleges, either here or in Europe, to draw that talent over here, to test the talent at a lesser cost, and also to groom and train those individuals in a way that make them loyal to the organization and also make them familiar with the systems in place or the technologies at hand. So international education and the possibilities for organizations, companies to recruit international students is actually very important to us. Now, the change in legislation is creating a restriction in the flow of people and is creating problems for our members. What do they do about it? Essentially three things. The first one is to vocalize the concerns. Me being part of this webinar today is part of it, but we are passing on to the administration the message that restricting flow of individual, of professionals to the US will eventually translate in restriction for investment. We will not be able to fund research here. We will not be able to manage the businesses the way we intend to over here. And this will eventually translate into job losses or D&E investment reductions. Second thing companies do is to abide strictly by the regulation. So I want to be clear here that those organizations are not taking a chance on the regulation in place and have to obey the proclamations and will limit entries of students or limit internship if this comes into infringement with the legislation. The third thing is not stopping it, be creative, be adaptable, be opportunistic in the way we can look at how we can benefit from international student input into our organization while managing the two above. So I'll echo one of the first things that Isabel mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar, is that it's probably a wait and see type of attitude. Be opportunistic in the ability to bring students in and being vocal about this situation cannot go on, and we need to benefit from the input from foreign students into our organizations soon.
Truer words were never spoken. I mean, I think again, this is clearly an international challenge and has much broader implications than just the life of students. But for our companies, for our ability to attract investment, for our ability to continue to trade and grow our economic relationships across the Atlantic. So now I want to move into the questions and answers. We've had a number of questions that have come in. We've offered some answers on them. There's been some written answers gone back, but I just want to follow up with a couple of issues that have come up here. One, and I'll turn this specifically to our American institutions, Fernando and Jenny. Question came in, what percentage of your international student population do you think is actually going to be on campus and enrolled this fall, to the extent that that even means anything to say anymore? Fernando, you want to start? Or?
Yeah, that we're asking ourselves the same question. NAFSA, the national organization that tracks international students, estimated that 90% of the international students had gone home over the spring and summer. For Ohio State, we believe the numbers are much, much lower, and about 20-25% may have gone home. Some of them may be able to come back, not all. And it's new students, as Isabel noted, is much more difficult for new students to come in. So we want to find out, but we believe the majority of the continuing students will be able to be around, and OSU will have the mixed model of online, in-person, and hybrid instruction.
Yeah. Jenny, what do you think?
So we would estimate, and of course this is a very challenging question just because there's so many factors involved, but we would estimate that of our new international students, we are hoping about 30% will be on campus in the fall. As for continuing students, we are not 100% sure how many of those did go home or stay in the US during the pandemic, but we are estimating based on some surveys that we've sent out to international students, we're estimating about 75% of students who are continuing to be on campus in the fall or currently in the US. We estimate that most of the vast majority of our grad student population, international graduate student population, will be on campus, but our undergraduate population will probably be.
Yeah. Isabel, let me come to you with that real quick, just on the legal and procedural obstacles there. I mean, again, the issues, there's so many different issues that come up with this, your ability to get a visa. We have no idea when that presidential proclamation banning travel from Schengen countries is going to be lifted. And also, somebody has asked about the possibility about US students traveling to Europe. I mean, what does that look like?
So for now, unless you meet one of the exceptions, and it's primarily around family ties, if you have a French mother or if you have dual citizenships, all that, US students are not permitted to enter the Schengen countries. So that's still going on, and they are watching. And this is all just linked to COVID-19. There are no European countries who have announced a proclamation similar to that of the United States, that they wish not to have students present to protect their own labor markets. So it's strictly about COVID-19 in Europe. So we expect that once perhaps as we know, there are either vaccines in the works or cures, even potentially today, yesterday, President Trump was talking about cures that could be lifted. But I want to go back also, a lot of parents worry about sending their students to the United States if the visa situation is fixed. Of course you worry because your kids are away, and usually in your own countries, you're very familiar with the healthcare system, and everybody knows that the healthcare system is very costly. However, when students come to the United States, they must have healthcare insurance. So in a sense, they will be covered. So that should not be a concern for families. The students will be covered by the insurance that is provided via the university here. I also want to add that and echo what Cedric said about the need for reform and being also vocal about this, because although the announcement by the Trump administration a few weeks after the proclamation that it would ban and not authorize students to study only online, this should not have surprised everybody. This is an old rule that's on the book. Today, and universities that have programs that have been purely online since the beginning, before COVID-19, know that foreign students have never been allowed to enroll in these programs. So this new outlook on the world with pandemics such as COVID-19 is going to require changing the laws on the books regarding online learning. Everybody's moved to it. We're just going to have to adapt to it. And it's just a rule that is antiquated and no longer fits the world we live in.
We're coming close to the end of the time. I want to ask Cedric and Philippe to quickly respond to a question from one of our members, Oksana Prokhorova. She manages the industry partnerships there at the University of Cincinnati. She points out, of course, that the tendencies that many companies are actually just accelerating things, ways of changing how they do business in response to the COVID crisis, developing these hybrid models and partnerships. She said global internship issues with visas and mobility are being solved by having students work at university labs instead of on company shop floors, doing simulations for IoT industry research. The question she poses is, what is the industry take on supporting these kinds of activities that allow training global talent and that give access to practical industrial experience, but in the current environment, and particularly sort of in that kind of quasi-academic setting? Cedric, you want to start with that? Or?
Sure. So excellent question. I would say that companies have been adapting to that new reality in their relationship with their customers, in their internal processes. So training of students is no different. There have been a phase of adaptation, and in some cases, remote work as well as using university labs for projects has been allowed or has been encouraged. I would say that there are some limitations to that, in the sense that depending on the function, if you're talking about software engineering, IT, finance to a certain degree, you can do remote work. If you're talking about mechanical engineering, if you're talking about robotic, if you're talking about product application, where you actually need to touch the product to make it work, there are clearly limitations about that type of programs. What I mentioned earlier on as being opportunistic, it's a case by case. If the companies can make it work, they will make it work, but there are some limitations relative to the nature of the work being done.
Philippe?
I cannot say that better, but that's absolutely the truth, and we will have to adapt. Obviously, there will be a before and an after COVID-19, clearly, and like Cedric said, a lot of activities can now be done remotely. However, the ones that are on the shop floor, this one that will be pretty difficult to replace and do that from remote.
Well, this has been fabulous. We are at the top of the hour. Obviously, we could go on. I mean, there's other questions that are still coming in. I think one I just mentioned, can universities and industry influence legislation on some of these topics, both on education, on immigration, and on modernization? I think not only can they, but they should. And however you want to influence that, I think, our corporations that employ so many people certainly have an obligation to step up and speak to their legislators when appropriate to raise any issues and concerns they might have. In any case, our time is at an end. That concludes today's webinar entitled COVID-19 International Students, Challenges for Schools and Employers. I want to say again, deep thanks to our presenters, Cedric Ballerin, Isabelle Bibet-Kelniak, Karine Cho, Philippe Garnier, Laurent Servant, Jenny Suttmuller, and Fernando Unzueta for sharing your experience and your insight. Special thanks also to Nelly Boniol and our French-American Business Alliance for help and encouragement in conceiving and organizing this event. Most importantly, thanks to you, our audience, for joining our discussion. A reminder, all comments and opinions presented by our speakers today are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the European American Chamber of Commerce or its members. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar and posting it to our YouTube channel. We will also send around the slides to everyone who registered. I would encourage you to stay in touch with your local chapter of the European American Chamber of Commerce for information on upcoming events and webinars, and be sure to look for that recording and recordings of our other events on that YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining us, and farewell.